really good. Can you explain the relative humidity thing?
Well, he actually sent the paper, but I cannot read it. But as he explained it, it's events that are happening in the object that they are examining. I'm not really sure actually how to
but that's the beginning. Yeah, go ahead.
There was a big reshuffle of V&A. They were concerned about that they were moving furniture, I think, from ground floor to top floor. Big change in environmental conditions, which they were aware of. But then there seemed to be this team coming in from somewhere in Europe, Czech Republic, who were basically setting up a particular item with microphones.
Like a chair or something.
Yeah, I can't remember what the particular item was. It was a lacquered item or something, and it was listening to the object and cracks. But Simon said to me today that in the RH events paper, it doesn't mention that he subsequently has spoken to the author of the paper that these cracks create surfaces. But yeah, he said he had a little bit of trouble teasing this out of the guy that wrote the paper.
Yeah, you could hear the surfaces growing.
So
it's quite amazing.
Also, what was interesting was that the technical term for this cracks happening was the appearance of a new surface.
Yes.
That's what caught us as
Yes.
a very nice image.
Yeah. So that when one put the microphone to these objects, whichever happened to be, this happened in this case be furniture, because it had to be, they had to understand how the humidity was affecting or not affecting their work. And when a crack happened, rather than seeing it as the piece coming apart, it was seen now as a piece having another aspect that added to itself. And that was very interesting. So the cracks became surfaces. The cracks were the surface, so rather than being an abyss, they were a surface. And it just went on, and so we just snowballed into this mad discussion. It was a lot of fun. Dane, did you want to add anything? No? Mattia?
Well, we didn't come up in the seminar, but I found a collection of novels with this idea of cracks on surface. Was a Russian Dadaist writer whose name is unpronounceable. It's got 3 krits in the name. And one of the short stories is The Collector of Cracks.
Is the color of cracks?
The Collector of Cracks.
The collector of cracks, wow.
And it's a story of a preacher that summons all the cracks at night from the wall, and all the cracks, whether they are littered cracks in furniture, crevices in the mountains, go to him. And it very much refers to negation, Hegel. But then one night he speaks longer than needed, and light comes and the cracks cannot go back to the places. And so the surface cannot be reconstituted as it was. And
it's
the
fantastic.
world falls apart for that.
Wow, great.
I can't imagine the name of the writer, but I can pronounce it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, excellent. Okay, so with that introduction, Emily.
Yeah.
Do you want to come to the table, or can you? No, you're right there.
Yeah, I'm okay.
I'm hiding.
As long as people don't mind. Yeah, because I think last week, because we spoke about subjugated knowledges and things too, and all of that came out of Guy's box. So I thought because 7, it's such a long chapter, and it gets to the kind of crux of why, of kind of the quantum side of why she's made this philosophy and kind of why she's so kind of committed to Bohr and stuff like that. So I thought I'd have a go at reading through kind of the key points of the kind of science side of things as to why she's made this agential realist thing. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So she basically says, because the point of the chapter is that she's trying to get across is that she says, according to Bohr, the central lesson of quantum mechanics is that we are part of the nature that we seek to understand.
So what page is that on?
That is on 247.
Okay.
I've got a million bazillion quotes from this. They are all numbered, but I don't know whether to tell you.
Always say, because I think it's being recorded.
Okay.
So people can find it that way.
Okay, so yeah, the chapter she kind of talks about the differences between Bohr, Heisenberg and Schrödinger and the kind of differences in their equations concerning wave mechanics and their ideas about wave mechanics. And she later talks about it through a lot of Gedanken experiments and things like that. but then in particular she kind of aims to explore the importance of superpositions.
Great.
So, which she says are to embody the mysteries of quantum mechanics 255. So when waves add together, I mean we've spoken about this a little bit already, but when waves add together, the amplitude of one wave is added to another, creating a linear combinational superposition of the component waves. I'm sure some people could probably explain this better than I could.
Can anybody explain it better than Emily? That was pretty good.
No, that was it. Okay, you got it. Thank you very much. Okay.
And what does it mean to say amplitude?
So we're talking about the kind of peaks and troughs of the waves and things like that.
Okay, but just to make sure that amplitude is not understood as the same thing as synthesis,
Right.
because what is a synthesis? Or why is that so important to know that the waves encountering each other don't form
Is
a whole?
this in a way that she's not talking? She's really saying that it's not a mixture of anything.
Right,
Yeah,
very important.
It's not a mixture. It's
Critical.
something else. So this all relates to kind of in the quantum world, particles can be thought of like waves, and vice versa. Superpositions don't represent mixtures of particles. So superpositions, they do not represent mixtures of particles with determinate properties. Rather, superpositions represent ontologically indeterminate states with no determinate fact of the matter concerning the property in question, which he says. I don't actually have a page number from that, which is that.
265.
265. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Welcome.
Okay. So and then she's talking about kind of hypothetically measuring factors of particles using machines that sort particles. So what she's saying really is that it doesn't sort the particles, but that's.
And what does that mean to say that?
Because hopefully I will explain that you
Okay.
you can't really sort them because they'll act differently at different times. Yeah.
Okay.
So she's her two examples. She starts off by explaining a kind of example sorting particles by colour, kind of hypothetically, and then also by the direction of their spin. So the kind of example that she gives, I think, is that if you put particles through a device that would measure whether they're a particular type of particle, and they would kind of factor them out into yes it is or no it's not, and you could keep putting them through machines. So if it came out that in the first, it's really hard to explain, isn't it? It's the first one, like, if it came out saying it was a particular sort, everything else you'd then put through another machine, but then if you put it through the same kind of machine again, you'd still get some of those particles again. Like it would seem like it would factor them out along the way, but actually
Can you read the section that you're on page 265? I think it's important here. From Let's Look to it is well known. So those three paragraphs. So I think that will summarize the
I'm sure she
thing.
can
And
speak
Mattia, you
about
can
it
jump in where the
much
Greek
more.
is. To say
Sorry,
what
where
the
am I
Greek is.
reading this from?
From Let's Look at the important difference between superposition and mixture.
Right. Okay, let's look at the important difference between superpositions and mixtures in more detail. Technically speaking, a mixture refers to a collection or ensemble of particles, each with a determinate value of the property in question, such that the state of any given particle is determinate but unknown.
Okay, what does that say? What's the translation of that, Joe? Can you give me an example in everyday language? Mixture is a collection or ensemble of particles, each with a determinate value.
Yeah.
Yeah, just slap him. No, just kidding. Can you explain what you just did?
Well, because we don't know the colors, because we see just the tips.
Yeah.
But all of them have their own color,
Yes.
and this is a mixture, and all of them can be discovered.
Right. Unto themselves.
And
Yeah,
it's
well,
not
That's a mixture.
not the picking up of the pen which defines the colour that is already defined independent of the
Yeah.
measurement.
Yeah, I was going to use, my example was your students in your classroom. So they form a thing called a classroom. You could say they are a diverse group of kids. It's a diverse group. So the notion of group is a plural, even though it's a singular plural. And the plurality of group means that the each entity within that group has its own determinant beingness, as it were. But that's equally the same here.
Okay.
It's kind of talks about.
But I think that your example is more tricky because this
Being.
okay, this also can be we can say that the colors are not really part of the pen with a different line with a different color. Okay, but like when it comes to kids, also their identities are
Malleable.
a lot in their relations. So it's a
they're
bit
much more of a superposition.
yeah.
They're not they're forming, they're in
Mhm.
process.
But even if they were old people, still they would play. They would play roles all the time. They would be different.
Did you know that elderly and children do not have a tendency of getting cholera? And that is because, I found this out today from one of my MA students who's working on this, that it's because people of middle-aged origin, so anyone after puberty and before you get old, whatever that is, has an acid in their stomach that's produced by stress that for some reason children and old people don't have, because the old people don't care any longer, the young people don't even realize, something like that, and that creates an antibody. The stress creates stress enables the acid to break. I'm saying it the wrong way. The stress creates an acid or kills the acid so that the cholera takes root. Anyway, sorry to. But I just meant children in the very basic sense of over there, like a group. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, go on. Okay, so just you get the sense that the mixture is about a collection, and the collection. You don't talk about collection. Collection, the word collection is a plural, but it's a collection. So you're thinking of a plural that is made up of things. I have a collection of maps, and that they're taken together, they make this thing, the collection. Okay, go on.
Me? Yeah.
Yep.
So in particular, in a mixture, each particle is represented by a determinate eigenstate.
And what's an eigenstate?
It's, I think from what I can gather, it's if you measure a particle, it'll have like there'll be however many eigenstates, and it has to be in a it can't just be anywhere, or it can't be doing anything. It has to be doing specific kind of things.
It is a characteristic.
It is a character.
What page is that on?
The beginning of the chapter, somewhere, she specifies that eigenstate, eigen in German means characteristic.
Yeah.
So that
And state means.
state. So in the sense that there is the example she makes of color for the particles
Yeah.
is that characteristic, but actually what she refers to is a spin
Yeah.
Spin,
Yeah. Great.
of a particle, which is a very problematic concept from Newton world point of view.
Yes. And why is it problematic?
Well, if I remember it correctly, if you spin an object in Newtonian or Euclidean space, once you have spun it 90 degrees, 180, 270, 360, you will get back to the first position.
Yeah.
While particles, once reach 360, you spin it again and you get yet another characteristic.
Yeah.
So there isn't the sense of a 3D or round
Great.
unity that.
And is there a mathematical formulation for this eigenstate? Of course there is.
I mean, it's psi, the letter they use.
And what's the letter?
Psi.
Do you know how to say that? Say it again.
Psi. P-S-I.
Psi. It's almost as good as superpositionality. It's shorter. Psi.
Yes, I think I've read something about that too. It's kind of like if you, like some particles or some things would take like 1.5 times round to get back
Yeah.
to looking like what they were, instead of like weird stuff like that.
But they also often don't come around to looking like they were. So then the next question is, when do they come around or not come around? But anyway, that's pushing it. Okay, so let's go back to the reading.
Back to my quotes them.
Yes, please.
Okay, so...
So we got the in particular.
Oh,
Mixture.
this reading, yeah. So mixtures are often described statistically, but significantly, the use of probabilities in this case is not connected with quantum indeterminacy, but simply the fact that the value of a property for a given particle is unknown. That is, the use of statistics marks our ignorance. Each particle has properties with determinate properties, but we may be uncertain about the values of particular properties for any given particle.
Okay, now just the last two paragraphs then.
Say them again.
No. By contrast.
So, by contrast, superpositions embody quantum indeterminacy. If we shoot a beam of particles represented by a superposition of, is that psi? Is that what that is? Is that, yes,
Yeah.
what you said.
And psi, what's the little word, the little letter underneath it? Can you read that letter?
And, well, is it a U or is it something else?
It's a U.
It's a U.
Okay. And
Psi,
psi
subscript
D.
U. And what does it mean to have a subscript U? Anybody?
Yeah, up and down.
Spin it upside down.
Spin, yeah.
Very good. Okay. Would it matter if it's U or the next one is D? Why? What does D mean? Good. So good. Okay. And so one of the psi's is up and the other psi is down. Okay. And what is the psi that's up versus down? What is that? That's the spin, right?
That's whether it goes in the top slate or the bottom slate.
Good. Okay. So by contrast, superpositions do what?
Embody quantum indeterminacy. If we shoot a beam of particles represented by a superposition of psi up and psi down, eigenstates, into an, what was this called?
Sue Golding.
A Sue Golding device.
Now, what does it really stand for?
A Stern-Gerlach.
Yes, and what's a Stern-Gerlach as opposed to an un-Stern-Gerlach?
I mean, it just says in this that it sorts particles. Probably does something
Andrea,
else.
do you have any idea what a Stern-Gerlach is?
I have freaking no idea. 259.
Yeah.
259, everybody.
It has an inhomogeneous magnetic field oriented along a particular direction.
Wait.
Sorry.
Say it again. Where are
On
you?
258. A device that can be used to measure spin values along a particular direction in space is the Stern-Gerlach apparatus, SG for short. The SG device has an inhomogeneous magnetic field oriented along a particular direction.
So what does that sentence mean?
Um,
What does it mean to say that something is inhomogeneous? Is that the same thing as heterogeneic? They're just being long.
Maybe you would think so.
Yeah, we think so. No, it's a trick question.
yeah, but it's not.
We looked it up. Like
No,
she.
we'll just, no cheating. What do you think it means? Well, what's a magnetic field?
Something that attracts.
Okay. And it's a field, so it's something that attracts, but the field is wider than a point. I mean, it implies like a plane of some kind. And that field is not styrated, but it's not a solid field. That's what inhomogeneous is. That makes sense. Did anybody not understand that sentence?
You can say not striated.
Not striated, not heterogeneic. It's not that it's It's not that it's heterogeneic, so it's not homogeneic. It's to say something it has a homogeny to it is to say it's smooth, so that the magnetic field would be smooth, and it'd be like
It's
just
evenly spread, isn't it?
evenly spaced, and be something that you could pull, and there would be no air. Let's say, just in your mind to think of it that way. Although there's no air anyway, but so you could pull it, and it would still be the point. The point is being stretched. That would be homogeneic. So, pardon me, striated would be exactly what you think. Just kind of some of your paintings, right? It's kind of weaving, or it's kind of strips or something like that. This would be the striated thing. It's not that either. So it's not homogeneic. It's not this thing. But on the other hand, it is a smooth field. So that's what they're getting at.
It reminds me that has anybody seen the show Icon Railway?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
I was talking about that last. You mean the Lithuanian guy?
Yeah, with the
Yeah.
magnets.
Yeah.
Kind of move, but they don't move in a uniform manner. They kind of stick to each other and then move apart and then come back.
Yeah.
Not in any kind of particular order that you can recognise.
Yeah.
No, it seems like someone's underneath doing it.
Yeah.
I used to do
That's
as a
right.
kid with the magnet. It's amazing.
Okay.
Just as it, so.
We won't just so we have this. Okay. So it discriminates between the up and the down. This device. And it does so by splitting a beam of particles into two traces, depending on their spin values. Okay. So we'll just skip forward again now to get to the SG bit. Device. Yeah. Go on.
Okay. Device. Our inability to predict which particles will emerge with eigenvalue up and which would eigenvalue down is not due to our ignorance concerning a state with determinate values of. What is this now? Is this
S.
something else that no? Okay, just S. Okay.
S that I
S is
think.
equal Z, but rather because the values are themselves indeterminate before their measurement. In this case, the use of probabilities is intrinsic to the nature of quantum phenomena.
Does that relate to anybody's work? That sentence, Guy.
Mhm.
Can you explain how that relates to your work?
It's the use of probabilities in your work, isn't it?
No, no. I mean, the work has probabilities, but there's something going on in that box. Remember. You want to give it a go, Matteo?
Well, the way, the fact that the indeterminacy is intrinsic to the particle or to matter rather than depending on the intervention of an observer changes entirely the image of matter that that science presents. Because in the case of the mixture, where we don't know the colors, but we know that there are colors, what the structure of thought of the paradigm is that the colors can be known, and there is an ideal state, or let's not use state because an ideal situation in which infinite precision is possible, and I would know all the colors a priori. While in this case, there is no possibility. Sorry, it's not that there is no possibility of reaching that ideal state. It's the ideal state that doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a state of indeterminacy, or of, to make it more visible, more visual, fluid, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
where the interaction, which Barad called interaction, is necessary to make it happen,
Mm-hmm.
to make the particle become such. So there is a difference between a particle that would appear as red or up or down for us versus a particle that instead has that characteristic eigenstate in itself. I'm using this again in terms of the purpose here, which is the condition of the mixture, and instead something that does not respond as a past for us in itself.
Mm-hmm.
The first state we encounter is the relationship with the particle.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I understand of
Yes.
of the work.
And that's what you do in your work. I mean, so it's not that it's important or not that you're there or not there. It's that the particles or the entities that create the sound are creating the sound, not irrespective of your being there, but there's an engagement, there's different forms of encounter that go on.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean.
Can someone
it
open the
does-
window? Because at this end it's very warm. Yeah. Thank you, Emma. Yeah. Go ahead.
It does speak to this, the position which I am in relation to the work. It's not a composition in the way that I compose the sources into a certain image or totality or whatever it is. suggestions of ideas or gestures that are not determined in the sense of
Right.
what the effect will be. But then they produce certain effects, they create those kind of tracks, and those become another move. in that
Yes,
sense.
and that's why your work is a work about minor acoustics and not grand narratives. Because it's exactly coming from this point.
Minor acoustics versus?
Grand narratives, rather than a grand representational or a narrative that would, or like what I think Matthias said, the image of matter in science is a very different image. It's one that you can get to when you need to observe. And this is not about the observational. And that actually has to do with your work as well. Okay. We're almost finished with this sentence. Do you want to just finish the reading of that?
Where are we now?
So start at the top, by contrast.
Okay,
we'll
by
just get the whole
contrast,
sentence.
superpositions embody quantum indeterminacy. If we shoot a beam of particles represented by a superposition of psi up and down eigenstates into a Sue-Golding device, our inability to predict which particles
Now
will
you're going to
emerge-
have to remember what it's called. In a viva, this will be very bad. Does anybody remember what it's actually called?
Stern-Gerlach.
It was a good noise.
That's
I
right.
don't know how it's called, but I was going
That's
in
right.
the play.
You just sort of mumble it during
the
the
machine
like,
now.
Sterling. Yeah, go on. Okay.
Okay. Into a device, our inability to predict which particles will emerge with eigenvalue up and which with eigenvalue down is not due to our ignorance concerning the state with determinate values of S, Z, but rather because the values are themselves indeterminate before their measurement. In this case, the use of probabilities is intrinsic to the nature of quantum phenomena.
So there you see you were right when you were talking about Guy's work having probabilities. But the important part was the fact that it was indeterminate. To understand that the beginning and like the initial point and the thing that's produced in the point are two indeterminate as opposed to two determinate endpoints.
Right.
So the probability is this complex probability that deals with the state of indeterminacy rather than the state of determinacy. Okay, just one last paragraph and then we're finished with this important thing about superpositionality.
Where are we now? Blah, blah, blah. Significantly, superpositions and mixtures are physically distinguishable. They leave different traces. Superpositions allow for interference effects, but mixtures do not. To see this, let's consider. Are we going to go into this now? To
No.
see. Blah, 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 blah.
I mean, unless you want to. But so that's so superpositions, they're physically distinguishable. They leave different traces. So the superpositionality allows for interference effects. Mixtures do not. What does that mean, Dane?
Essentially it means superpositions are diffractions. Diffractions are the effects of difference. The diffractive apparatus show the effects of difference, whereas mixtures are mixtures. They follow, they simply interact with each other and they don't make anything new, they don't break apart, they react but they don't do anything.
So in the latter case, the mixture case, we're talking about programming. In the former case, we're talking about artificial intelligence, learning. It's how something learns. It's weird.
It's a different kind of knowledge making.
Yeah. It's not carnal knowledge, though. No, I mean, that's I'm sorry, that probably really came out of the blue. Yeah.
In reference with Vicky Kirby, quantum anthropology.
Yeah, we can make it that.
She was talking about how bacteria can be seen as coding, decoding, learning apparatus themselves. So it's not that there's some things they are mixtures and some things they are not.
Very
It's just how
important.
do you actually see that, whether or not you want to apply classical ontology, and then you will always get mixtures, you will always get cause effect, always have mechanization of reality, but
Mhm.
also abstraction of it within substance and appearance and all of that.
Mhm.
Or if you want to look at it in a diffractive way, then you can see intelligence and diffraction just everywhere, and there's no deep cut between the human intelligence and mattering, because
Mhm.
mattering is intelligence.
Excellent, excellent. And so actually that feeds right into your thesis on facing, or whatever you're going to call it in the end, because that is often seen in the terms of audience, object, and in fact it's or mixture, if you want to put it like that. Instead, it's this other kind of knowledge.
Yeah. The only difficulty I will have is that it is kind of normal, natural for us to think in subjectivist terms, and so it would probably look like a weak point not to have a nice bridge between this way of describing what art is as a sort of a self-decoding, learning thing that diffractly reconfigures itself through each encounter, but not be able to bridge that with the actual experience of the one person that perceives itself as an identity and going forward, meeting artworks and stuff like that. That is an issue, but yeah, I don't feel responsible for that issue. It's just way bigger than my research. It's just that might be seen as a weak point because
in the diffraction argument.
No, it's just that the diffraction argument it makes sense on its own, no problem. The problem is that then if someone wants to tease me and say, how do you apply this to my going to museums, then the issue is you need to get to lose no, you need to lose the eye.
Yes.
You need to lose the eye, but people might not be happy with that because it sounds like the theory is wrong, not their preconception of having an eye.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
There is a show at Tate Modern, the Turbine Hall, you would have mentioned.
But what's that again?
There is a show in the Turbine of Tate Modern at the moment by a French artist called Philippe Parreina.
Oh yeah.
It puzzles me because it is not what it seems, and the presentation of the little leaflet is even more misleading. There is a great contraption of lights and sounds and visuals going on in the Turbine Hall, and you would think that is either controlled or programmed. And in fact, there is a little room at the end of the Turbine Hall with a lot of technology. It looks like science fiction on display, and a jar of fermenting yeast, on which there are a number of probes sensing what the yeast is doing, and this controls all the events of the music, the lights, the movement of the projections, the movement of the lights along the track, and so forth. So there is this element of not having an agency that controls the installation. At the same time, it is not random, but it is this heart, and I say heart rather than brain, as president, of the installation is hidden away, and also it is not clear in which term the software that then translates the data gathered from the fermenting yeast into information for moving the installation has been conceived. I don't say coded technically, but along which parameters it has been conceived, because the agency could actually cut in at the moment of writing that software. But it very much speaks to this idea of something that is movable, and nevertheless can express a form of intelligence in the sense of emergence and learning rather than programming. But it remains so. For me, it was confused, but nevertheless, it's interesting to go to see, because there's a huge thing going on, and then there's a small jar at the far end, literally hidden away. You have to find a room, and it's interesting to see all the monitors on which these things is controlled.
And how does the curator or the artist whoever it is that explains what
It is not explained. They say that Pareno works with scientists and collaborates with technicians, and the data is gathered from the East, and that's all one gets.
I see. Okay.
So it remains a bit obscure. But
Okay.
it is interesting to sit there and watch it thinking of what Roberto just brought up.
Huh. Okay. Great. Any questions so far? Welcome to the madness.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry I'm late.
That's right. So, you want to just, so we're pretty much done with this now, right? Would you like to continue?
Yeah.
Could I just ask one more question?
Sure. No, absolutely.
Dane, what you said about like the superposition difference and whatnot would go back to the question of what's the difference between difference and diffraction.
Diffraction produces difference.
That's what you said, no?
And the material apparatus which allows diffraction to happen is what produces what do you call it? I don't know.
But isn't it
Close.
an entanglement anyway? Because you say that
Entanglement.
Hello. I'm fine. Who's this? Mark. I'm in the middle of a PhD seminar. Can I talk to you a little bit later? Yes, but let's talk about that after. Okay, see you. Bye. Bye. That was weird. Okay, I do apologize. Would you like to start again with your? You gave up on trying to explain difference, and then Alberto, you just jumped in.
yeah, I just wanted to say that
I didn't mean give up. I meant went as far as you wanted to go, and now we hand it off to Alberto.
to say that difference is produced by diffraction, it would be a way of having a cause effect, whereas it's more of an entanglement. And anyway, I think first of all we need to decide what difference is, what we mean with difference.
Okay.
Also,
Why don't you start? What do you mean by it?
well, because we can mean difference in different in various ways.
Okay.
And the way I see difference within the context of this discourse is it's like the very mattering is difference.
Okay.
Meaning that if the diffraction is itself a superimposition of waves, patterns, stuff like that, those are differences as well.
Yes.
So we need to decide how to call things, because we can say that difference is the product of diffraction, but we can also say exactly the opposite.
Yes.
So
And we can also say that they're in fact the same.
we can say
So
that
we can have three different positions, as it were.
we can say that they are the same, and we can just use these two names only to make sentences more intelligible.
Or complicated.
Or no, just
Yeah. So, okay.
I would say that maybe we could just
It's not quite it yet, though.
no.
I can see why you're saying that. Matteo?
I would throw in, I mean, it probably will complicate things first, but you're right when you say, if we say that diffraction causes different from diffraction, we are returning to the linear causality. There is, I would introduce here the concept of augmented causality, which very much relates to these problems, as in the emergence of the new surface. Precisely when we were reading the description of what a mixture versus superposition is. Mixture,
Which is page 265, Simon.
Yeah.
mixture stems from a deterministic structure or image of thought, and allows, at least in ideal terms, for a complete and absolute calculation, and therefore causality can be retraced to the to the initial state and to any final state into the future. Although you would need the eye of a god to do it probably. While
Parenthesis. Yeah.
while superposition, precisely because it has intrinsic indeterminacy, has some open space for randomness, which cannot be calculated in advance, and once it has happened, creates new steps, or each time new microsurfaces, which supports the following step without being open to linear retracing.
Okay.
In this sense, you have a causality, but it's a causality that creates more than what it had in the effect is always bigger than the cause, because it is else, is not commensurable to the cause.
Right.
And
Yes.
that's what is taking place.
Very important, very critical point here. Just to retranslate that in case we've left anyone behind, you know, if you think about it as the difference, as thinking about indeterminacy in the quantum way is a different kind of indeterminacy than in a negation way. So the negation that tried to step into this thing called indeterminacy, which then brought with it a whole series of steps, they're putting aside and instead talking about the role of the probability or randomness, as you put it. And the random is a pattern that is produced in a rough sense, and like the paper you guys wrote, the degrees of roughness. You know, it has degrees of positionalities in it, but it's not understood in terms of a transcendental move that the negation would impose. It is just the move of itself. So that's why I was thinking about your work in the box. You know, the way in which these things come together, or Jakob's work on home, the way in which you look at soft, or whatever it happens to be. So it's just to try and clarify that diffraction, or discussing difference in terms of diffraction, enables a way of talking about this randomness that can bring in augmented causality or augmented effect, because the effect is itself an elsewhere that could be read backwards up to a certain point, but not up to any origin point, because there is no origin. And so, in fact, the search for the origin of the universe is ridiculous, because there's no first. Did that make sense? Finally, Andrea.
Halfway,
Yes?
maybe.
Halfway. You've met it halfway, hence the title of the book. Okay, we're just going to push on, because I think, unless you really want to stick with this. Joe, did you? No, you're just
I'm just scratching.
you're scratching.
I did have a question about the mixture and superposition,
Okay.
and do they actually work together? Do you need one?
Why are you asking that question? What is it? What's the question you're really asking?
Because I'm thinking now about the school situation, and that the mixture seems to be something that describes it, but is kind of static, whereas the superposition allows for, like I said, like this idea of fluidity in the learning. And
But let's make sure we understand what the superpositionality is. Anybody want to go again with the notion? You want to say what superpositionality is? No. Yes.
Not really.
No. Give it a go.
Well, it's not a mixture. Well, I always previously understood it in terms of
Right.
waves. But sitting here, I'm wondering if I'm just getting confused with the idea of diffraction. But when two waves combine, they create, it's a whole new other wave that is neither
The first.
or the second.
It's not the combination of the two waves.
No.
What is it?
Well, there was an added extra element tonight, that the superposition itself was actually indeterminate.
Right. That's good. And how
Whereas
does
I
that connect
previously
with what?
thought it kind of just created a whole new other thing, but that whole new other thing is actually indeterminate itself.
Yes.
So nothing ever really gets determined at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Unless you are a Republican. Okay. Did that answer your question? Or does that sound like what you said
My question.
for your statement? your statement about what you did to clarify what Mattia was saying?
And that was your question.
Oh, it was your question? No, not your question. I know it was your question, but you originally were saying something about how you were explaining the relationship of superpositionality. Do you think that?
Oh yeah, no, I was just saying that difference is the product of diffraction sounded like
Oh, it was a
possibility
yeah.
of
Yeah.
a linear causality, and the things might be more complicated than that, or we need to decide exactly what difference is in this context.
Right, so in that context then, you brought up the question of, well, can I use then the term superpositionality in thinking about the children running around and being a collection, as it were, but also in different spots. But I'm worried that it's a different notion of superpositionality. It's not following what.
I think once you put art into that mixture, that starts to happen.
That what starts to happen, the superpositionality.
Yeah.
But there again, one's taking as a given what you're trying to prove. So Simon was saying something very different there. Hang on to your superpositionality question. Yeah.
In a superpositionality, basically, because of this way, whatever
The new
happens,
wave,
you cannot
yeah.
go back and determine where did it came from in a way. You don't have the chronos of history, so it moved. You cannot find that movement because what's happening is it's not a wave in a way. That's
Yeah.
the only thing, and that's so you can't determine that it was there and there. But you understand that this is a product of another interactions that occurred, that you have that superpositional wave in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yep.
Am I thinking right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite apply to the children in the classroom. So it's probably a bad example that I gave. I probably just threw you off there. It's better to think of the pens at the moment. Don't go to the children yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then it sounds like everything is just one big
Diffraction.
superposition.
Superposition.
I know she says that diffraction is basically the fundamental stuff of everything, but we shouldn't. Everything shouldn't essentially be superposition, should it?
But
Or can't it be?
the thing is, you can't get to the whole picture just because these waves or these diffraction, whatever, they have a local effect, intensity. Like they are important, they matter in a certain dimension they create, but then they do have effects further away, but there's just no way to have one perspective, one point from which you can have the whole picture, because all these phenomena they don't exist in pre-existing space and time. They create their own space and time. But I think probably Mattia can explain this
No,
better.
it's right. Probably what is misleading is thinking the wave as a physical wave.
Yeah, that's
Because here is a wave of probability on a graph
Yeah.
we're discussing. And it describes degrees of freedom, that is the number of eigenstate or characteristic of the particle.
Yeah.
So it is completely abstract, and
Yeah.
picturing it only as the water going like this.
Yeah.
It's,
Then gets us into the children going like, let's play together or the band.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
everything that we see is the collapse of the wave function.
yes.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
there is
Good.
a way to illustrate this, and I underline illustrate because it's a bit of a jump, are the changes that take place in evolution, Darwinian evolution.
In Darwinian.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Darwinian evolution there is a front, which is the present, and you can take it in any moment of the chronology of the history of life, where there's a distribution. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some are blonde, some are brown, and they the variations happen at random. There is no reason. There is a bit of room for change, so the next offspring is a bit higher or a bit stronger or a bit better sense of
Yeah.
sight, whatever it is. And if there is a change in the environment so that one of these characteristics becomes more suitable, that offspring reproduces more than the others. and therefore that becomes the new evolution of that species. In this sense, one has an open state at the beginning, sort of a way which can go in any possible direction. And then one set of conditions chooses or determines the reproduction, or to use the Deleuzian term, the repetition of one characteristic. So we have what Sarah just said, the collapse of the wave. So all the possibilities disappear, and only one becomes this intersectional space and time.
And what is that one called? A, entanglement. B, diffraction. C,
Diffraction.
Good. Throw all the different ones. Right. Okay. Does that now make sense, or is that just like, ooh? So can you see why that's not difference? Okay, you want to say why you can see that, or just want to say yes? Okay, Simon, you want to say why it's not difference?
Probably not, no.
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry, I'm still very much in a Newtonian world where mixtures matter.
That's hilarious.
Because if you're trying to conserve an object, then you can't be in the quantum world. I don't
But you
think.
are when you're
You
talking
are,
about
but
when you were talking about the
you need to make
RH factors.
decisions, which are cuts, I guess.
Yeah, and also the cracks that came up.
But if you want to apply some kind of cleaning agent to something that's very susceptible to being cleaned, you need to be
In Newtonian.
in the Newtonian
Mm-hmm.
world, I guess.
Yeah,
And
makes sense. But that's a very
So
thin
this is
reason.
me trying to get out
That's a
of
very
having
thin
to
reason
answer.
as to why you're now not going to discuss this. It's accepted for now because you had to come in late and you're still
Right.
sorting yourself out.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. Okay, go on, Emily.
Yeah, I thought maybe I could mention as well, because Karen Barad goes over it, the kind of difference between Heisenberg and Bohr's uncertainty and indeterminacy
Great.
principles. So
Is everybody okay with the temperature?
No one's getting cold?
Okay, can you now shut the window?
Thank you. Okay, so
We need the temperature control people at the back row. Yeah. That's right.
Which page are we on?
So page 261, she writes, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is an epistemic principle. It favours the notion that measurements disturb existing values, thereby placing a limit on our knowledge of the situation. By contrast, Bohr's indeterminacy principle allows the quantitative expression of complementarity as an ontic principle. The point is not that measurements disturb pre-existing values of inherent properties, but that properties are only determinate given the existence of particular material arrangements that give definition to the corresponding concept in question.
Mm-hmm. You want to explain what that means? That's a very good quote.
Do I want to?
I mean, no. Please, would you? I was rhetorically asking you.
Can I go on to the other two nice little bits that I've got?
As long
I
as
think
it
helps.
does explain that, okay?
I put a little note in the side if it helps that said things don't pre-exist their interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Good. The interaction is what makes them be,
Yeah.
which is again your work and your work
Yes.
and your work.
Everyone's work.
That is a spoiler alert. Okay. Are you sitting down? Are you okay? Okay. Okay, go on.
Yeah, and then she writes on page 262, Heisenberg's account fits with Newtonian-style metaphysics, whereby the components to be measured are individual objects with determinate properties, measurements revealing the pre-existing innate value of physical quantities.
Pardon me, where did you go?
This is 262 now.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So-
Can you start the sentence again? Sorry.
Yep. Heisenberg's account fits with Newtonian-style metaphysics, whereby the components to be measured are individual objects with determinate properties, measurements revealing the pre-existing innate values of physical quantities. So it's kind of like our common sense.
Would it be fair to say, this is a open up question, that the reason then she goes on to start talking about mixture versus superpositionality, she's basically putting mixture in the Heisenberg camp,
Mm-hmm.
and she's putting superpositionality in the Bohr camp.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah, very much, because then she goes on 263. She says, however, Bohr's account is less intuitive, since it entails a radical departure from classical metaphysics. According to Bohr, quantum mechanics tells us that quantities are only determinate if the appropriate conditions for their measurement exist. That is, you use the right device. This device enacts a cut between the object of observation and the measuring device such that boundaries and properties in question become determinate. That might be super paraphrased because...
Yeah, it's definitely paraphrased, but it's a much better sentence than what is in front of us. Do you want to read that again? Because I was looking at it thinking,
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
I was thinking,
Yeah,
maybe you have a
so-
different translation. Wait a minute, she wrote in English.
Yeah, I rewrote it. However, Bohr's account is less intuitive since it entails a radical departure from classical metaphysics. According to Bohr, quantum mechanics tells us that quantities are only determinate if the appropriate conditions for their measurement exist. That is, if you use the right device. This device, and this is actually from 263, enacts a cut between the object of observation and the measuring device such that boundaries and properties in question become determinate.
So, just read that middle bit after where you decided to leave off. Again, just in future reference. While it's very good what you've done, try not to start off with somebody's quote and then finish it off differently.
Okay.
We have to break ourselves of this habit. Okay, but where you, according to Bohr, quantum mechanics tells us that, and then you went into a different thing, and I want to hear that again because I'm not sure if that's correct.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure where this is all from, whether I wrote this or whether it's from different parts of the book.
Well, it might be from you're just putting it together. There's a.
Okay. According to Bohr, quantum mechanics tells us that quantities are only determinate if the appropriate conditions for their measurements exist.
Say it one more time.
According to Bohr, quantum mechanics tells us that quantities are only determinate if the appropriate conditions for their measurement exist.
That
Good.
is actually a line.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
quoted it.
Yeah. You just dropped out the 4 lines in between.
Okay.
And why is that the case? Quantities are only determinate if the appropriate conditions for their measurement exist. How can that be the case, logically, if in fact they're always already indeterminate? If what you just argued 2 paragraphs earlier is to say that the difference between Heisenberg and Bohr is that Heisenberg is mixture, I mean, simple way of putting it, and Bohr is dealing with superpositionality. Superpositionality implies the indeterminacy of the entity that comes together, and there's 2 different indeterminate moments that create the collision, as it were, the entanglement. Then how is it that you can even say that the appropriate conditions for their measurement, that in Bohr's account, quantities are only determined if the appropriate conditions for their measurement exist? Can you explain that
So,
sentence?
I suppose it's just like that's when the diffraction moment happens, isn't it? It's kind of like things. I don't know.
Isn't he just saying you have to have the right kit to be able to see what you're doing?
But I believe there is
No, there's more than
notion-
that.
Yeah, the notion of right doesn't apply here. Because if we think the right kit versus the wrong kit, or the apparatus or whatever, then we assume that what's to be measured already exists in itself with the determinate properties, and therefore there is the right language to reach it and then to describe it. While what takes place here is precisely the opposite, or precisely the opposite is precisely the fact that there isn't a determinate object, and therefore there isn't the right language.
So why would Bohr then make this crazy comment?
Because he cannot live without objectivity. Even if he actually proves objectivity, would be something more like phenomenology or something else. But because he's a scientist,
No.
he cannot just go and say there's no objectivity, just accountability.
No.
No?
No. It's something closer to what Simon said. Simon, can you think of what this is? What did I say?
What did I say?
When would, if entities are indeterminate, it doesn't really matter how sophisticated your equipment is. You're not going, that's why you were saying, well, you can't have the right equipment because there's no right equipment. You know, it doesn't exist. So when could equipment that measures exist? What would you have to have in order for you to be able to measure the equipment? I mean, to measure the things, yes, Jello? No?
I mean, isn't that exactly what Matthias said earlier about evolution? Like this kind that suddenly that goes off. the diffraction happens and it goes off somewhere else. The pattern happens, but it's in that phenomena of that they both are adequate. Like they are both determinate, but they are never can be repeatedly determinate because of it. In a way, they can't.
If they're indeterminate,
yeah.
how can you get an equipment that can then look at it and determine it?
If you have a reference point.
And when would you have a reference point?
If you bring in the human.
No, but close.
But imposing
Knowledge.
Newtonian
Yes!
thing.
Yes! Yes. So, what does that then tell us about this scenario?
Is this where she criticises him for going back to the classic?
Yes.
Is there some point I can't remember where the passage is. She's concerned that he keeps.
Yes. But it could equally be said, I stayed up last night, hence I'm telling you this, it could equally be said that in talking about the Newtonian move is not because he's going back because of what you were saying, Alberto, because he's a scientist and he can't help himself, and that he has to, have this objectivity, this sort of observable objectivity position, but rather that there are times in our time that one deals with Newtonian physics. And Newtonian, it's not like there was Newtonian physics and then everyone went, aha, and went then to Einsteinian physics or whatever, quantum physics or whatever we're going to call it. It's that at the same time, the same time, space, environment, if you can determine things, then you can only do that if you're in a Newtonian moment. Because if you're in the quantum moment, you can't determine it. You can only do it by a probability. And that gets back to your genealogy thing, because that would be a probability question.
Yeah.
But Sarah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, let's go back to what I said earlier about everything that we see being the sort of the collapse of the wave function, that sort of that moment where it becomes the mixture rather than the superposition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Could indeterminacy be the incommensurable?
Measurability.
Because that has to include the measurable, even though it's incommensurable. It has to come with it.
So are you asking me this, or are you?
Well, I'm just throwing it out there.
Am I going to
now
prod you into making a statement?
Make a statement.
Okay,
possibly.
say it in a statement form.
Could another word for
Okay, that's a question
indeterminacy be the incommensurable? And if so, that gives me back the materials that I need.
And you come back to us now. You come back into the fold. No.
You can't.
Well, I guess it could, but you're really combining very different environments.
Right.
Or very different terms.
Hmm.
What does incommensurable mean?
That you can't hold two things together at the same time.
Yeah. And so if you do, what happens?
I'm not quite
What
sure.
happens, Trump? Okay, we're going to hold that.
Sorry.
Let's just hold that.
Sorry, Johnny, but
Yeah.
as to defend my attack, doesn't he forget that you cannot draw a line where his apparatus finishes, like the back of the apparatus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why actually it's a matter of accountability and reproducibility, but it's always a simplification. You will never get to the real thing. You will never get to the real accountability, because you can never say when the experiment with the apparatus ends.
Yes, but that's why you have to be very careful in reading this. It's not where Barad says, rather in Bohr's account, quantities are only determined if the appropriate conditions for their measurement exist. So, I mean, I'm not hearing in that what you're saying. I'm hearing that what she's saying is that if there is the ability to tell what a quantity is in a measurable way, then that's because there are the equipment which enables you to do this, or is there because the quantities themselves are enabling or are able to be quantified or able to be measured. And so it's it's not so much that the equipment doesn't have, or the apparatus doesn't have edges or doesn't have a back. It's rather that in order to understand how the quantities work and to not confuse them with the superpositionality, but rather to see them in terms of the mixture, then you have the equipment to do. Then that equipment will be enabling. You'll be able to use that.
I was just saying that useful tool.
Yes.
It is used because we see the usability of it, but it is simplification anyway. Like it doesn't ground on.
No, it's
you're sort of circling over the argument. A few weeks ago, Dane made it very clear that objectivity is not the certainty of something here, which I can touch the opposite is there, but has to do with the fact that whatever I am doing in acting produces results that I can repeat in the same way. So then you have this repetition, that's the definition of the scientific experiment, for example. This repetition of the scientific experiment. The experiment is an experiment and it is valid if it can be repeated. And according to the same parameters, will produce the same results. And this experiment that is repeatable becomes, not generates reality, generates the object. It is not a matter of not being able to reach an absolute reality and therefore sort of compromising for something that is approximate. That would be the Newtonian physicists. The quantum physicist instead knows that the determination happens once measuring starts, and then on that you build the future steps. So in this sense, diffraction generates reality rather than represents reality.
Yes, it generates reality. Yes. Clear? Good. Clear? Clear as mud? Clear-ish. Okay. Can we, I know that you have 100 pages to go through. We've only gotten through like 4. And what I'm wondering is if Coral or Stuart or Jamu, I just threw it in Jamu to annoy you. Did it work?
Yeah.
Oh, damn. Or Sophie want to now, because we're over halfway in the seminar, and I want to make sure we cover some of this. Do you want to add? Where were you in the chapter 7?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of, I guess, in a way following on from that, because I was thinking about the idea of measurement and.
By the way, did anybody speak to each other? Okay. Note selves. It's okay to talk to each other. More than okay. Okay, go on.
Yeah, so I just pulled an example from what I've been doing in the museum.
Okay.
So I was looking in the store that I work in for a collection of objects that kind of work within themselves as a singular object.
I'm going to just show these guys here. They can't see.
And they're called Ashanti, and then thinking about how they're then denoted within a database, and I was thinking about the idea of the surface and the cracks. So there's something about when an object becomes devoid of context, which so many of these do, because there's no record of where these actually came from, because they're so kind of ubiquitous in ancient Egypt. In tombs, it wasn't necessary to record them. But then, like with the cracks, suddenly by becoming measurement, an object develops kind of a list of attributes in its own. It's kind of divorced and it changes. And this idea of collection changes. But what I found interesting about this group of objects was that I'm trying to think where it was in the text, but something about, you know, if there's a change within the collection, it kind of throws the idea of measurement out. And I just noticed that one of the objects is a fake, and it's denoted within within a database, but because of the nature of working with, I don't know how many there are in that cabinet, 319, it would be wrong to, because the object numbers which denotes which one is fake are written underneath, so it would be wrong to lift each one individually for the point of this. So at that point it kind of throws the meaning of those objects into a state of flux.
It'd be wrong because because the objects are so fragile.
Yeah, well, to move any object, you kind of need a good reason. So I guess if it's known which one is fake, and probably the curator of that collection, we'd hope he'd know. He might not know because they're quite throwaway, even though they shouldn't be, because they're ancient Egyptian. They kind of are quite throwaway objects. But
wow.
But
keep sitting down. It's okay.
But for me, in terms of studying the collection of Birmingham, they've kind of just been. If you look at where the acquisition comes from, a lot of them have kind of been like, "Do you want these?" And Birmingham have sort of gone, "Okay." So the object numbers on the bottom, which is again a very questionable museum practice because this should be avoided. So I would have to lift each one. So now that's kind of I'm working with that. I'm within the state of flux because one object has kind of become radical.
Why is one fake? Okay. Did someone steal it or something? That's what I would do.
Well, this is what's interesting, I guess, about the change between object context and when an object becomes a list of events, because that's what happens to these objects. They become, like with the cracks, they become lists of events devoid from each other, so they become a particle, right, with that list of events and possible events that we try to minimise risk on, I suppose. So the fact that that's written as fake, that could have come into the collection as a fake, which is, it could be that someone's decided it's probably a fake. I don't know who's decided it's a fake, because at the point at which this database is collection, that information just isn't there. Is it definitely a fake? Therefore, if one is fake, are they all fake? Is one real? What is real? Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, and I thought that was quite interesting because they're collections in themselves, and that they're I guess a collection within their own meaning, and then within context, the Ashanti were put in tombs. So if you were wealthy, you would have lots of them, and they became your minions in the afterlife to do your work. So that's why they're so prevalent in Egyptian tombs. Even if you were poor, you might have one or two. If you were wealthy, you would have hundreds. So there's a lot of them. So that's kind of, so they're collected there. But then within here, they become a collection of just denoted, within a shelf that might have been from collections from other places. And then there's just this one kind of wonderful moment where someone goes, "That's fake," and it's just like, and I just thought it kind of, yeah. So I just more look for an example of it.
Interesting one. You want to talk about that, Simon?
It's just, I don't know if anyone heard about Banksy's intervention at the British Museum, where he painted a Neanderthal pushing a shopping trolley on a rock and then sneaked it into the British Museum with a really good label and planted it. And the British Museum, actually took it into their collection, and they liked his number so much that they kept his number as the museum number.
Okay.
Yeah, which I quite like that, but that's not really
so there's another Banksy intervention.
But your intervention, are you suggesting that sort of creates a cut or a new knowledge or a new...
Yeah, it's kind of... I guess I was sort of thinking about the way, and I wish I'd printed it out now, but I didn't. But it's so digitally now, because things are digital. Every time something is added to on the database, there's just a new line of code which says this has moved, conservation has happened, some kind of condition report, and that within itself just all denotes new surface within an object and new history. But in a bizarre way, it's also the object is in status in terms of the way we interpret history. The object's history has ended, but it's kind of gone on another history. But yeah, it's just sort of, I guess, thinking about the way we measure things, and I think that we measure things that all of this is authentic, maybe and all of it is real, and then it's kind of I wish I'd call some stuff out of the text, but yeah, throwing in kind of a radical, it's almost like a glitch maybe.
But does it require you as, you know, PhD student or conservator or whatever you're doing in this moment to come in and go, oh, that's interesting, that's a fake? What does that do to the whole notion of the collection, or to collect, or is there something in the moment of its fakery that produces a chain of meanings that get established?
Yeah, I think it does. I think having a fake does change meaning because it pulls into question meaning of other objects, but then also it becomes, while it's still a shanty, it becomes a different kind. So it becomes a fake one, but it's still stored, it hasn't been thrown away. And a lot of time, there's a lot of value in fakes now because they're quite interesting in themselves. So it just sort of...
And how old is that fake? Is it like 300 years old and the other one's like 2,000 years old?
Because because of these objects within terms of the collection, so that came in 2005, which makes me question whether that was discovered as a fake in 2005 and that changed the number, because the rest of them came in 96, 89, and then in the 50s. But in terms of this existence of these objects, because the objects, when they become devoid of context, have changed. That's where in terms of the museum, in a weird way, that's where their history starts.
Yeah, and that speaks to sort of like Ajamu's work, because your work in the archive is doing precisely the reverse, is trying to maintain the object's meaning somehow, or not to do a condition report, as it were, to just put these moments to it, but in fact, so the preservation of it is to preserve something that isn't part of the object as such, or the object, it's greater than the object that you're preserving. Something like that.
So I guess where it's like within meaning, so there's a certain amount of implied meaning with these objects, and that's something you need to go and find and Google or whatever. But in terms of what's actually stored as the information that is stored, just to pick one at random, it says Vishanti figure, green glaze, crude, thick and poorly finished, black painted details and illegible text. And that's what that is. But it's in terms of and you might be able to pick out what that is, but in terms of what it is, it's not
what it is.
But it's become through, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that through measuring, it has changed the object, and has even changed that collection of objects through the act of measuring. Because that's essentially what happens.
So it's denuded it in a certain, or it's taken away. It's done something.
I think it's, in a way, it's just become completely different, because I think if you just took this information and we somehow forgot what an Ashanti is, they're now devoid of meaning. To me, apart from being a singular particle within a system of equal, in just terms of atoms, they are now devoid of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have the context. Well, except for aesthetic, lovely kind of meaning.
Do you agree with this example? Emily? Anybody who's Stuart? You were doing another one of the chapters, right? No. Was it John? Who was doing the other 7?
Yeah, I was reading it's 7 as well.
So what do you think of what Coral just said?
Okay, well, I think in terms of this kind of notion of the real kind of keeps on cropping up in Barad's work, or in section, and so I'm in on page 340. On objectivity, then is about accountable to what is real, but then I don't get a sense of what he means by the real, and so I'm basically kind of and there's various things that's been jumping out at me in terms of this section, and so it's more about kind of questions around kind of what does she mean by the real? And also it's around how does kind of and the notion of diffraction and entanglement allows for a rethinking of things like kind of human identity, and categories such as race and sexuality and gender and class, because it feels like she wants to get rid of subjectivity and focus on objectivity, if I read it kind of correctly.
Well, if you read it as Coral
Yeah.
presented it,
Yeah.
it's not so much that she wants to get rid of it, it gets rid of.
Okay.
It's gotten rid of.
Yeah.
It becomes,
Through measuring.
through measuring,
Right.
it becomes gotten rid of. And she's suggesting something else that's going on.
Yes.
And it's a great section. You've taken us to the Beyond Questions of Human Knowledge section, which is page 340 to 341 and so on. Does anybody want to summarize what that?
So for me then,
What is that? What is that beyond? What is the question that's beyond it?
what is it that I'm just come up with a place that she like
What is meant by post-human here?
that's one of my questions.
Yeah. Does anybody want to give it a try? What does she think Bohr is going for with this post-human thing? Okay, a short answer before you guys don't drift off into another world is that the post-human implies that there's a way of having knowledge without human intervention involved. That's minimally what it's about. I mean, it's much more complex than that. So basically, what Coral has suggested is that in this way in which the determinant indeterminacy starts happening, when that determinant indeterminacy starts happening, you have a getting rid of meaning so that it becomes atom particle, and then it just matters how things are combined.
So she talks about humans as part of the world body space. I really like that.
Yeah,
So-
can you elaborate that?
Because I think that human interaction, or interaction as she calls
Yeah.
it, is changes the dynamics. So with corals, once humans start measuring, they're
Yeah.
actually changing the object itself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Mattia? You gonna answer that? No.
But isn't that the predetermined human that changes?
Yes, that's the predetermined.
That's what I'm thinking. The thing that the thing that measures, the thing that changes in that way is the prior human who exists outside of the system, then approaches the system.
And then approaches the system, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then can affect it.
Yes.
Like what Barad says, that human comes out in a way. There might be a human. Like there is a possibility of a human that comes from interaction. The quantum might attach itself in a certain way and produce something that appears to be like human. And that's it. So there is
Not that it appears to be like human, it is human.
It is human, yeah.
Yeah.
That is what human is. in
And
a
what
way.
does that mean to say human in that sense? For anybody that listened to the RCA talk, you will know.
Pre-individual.
No. It is about the, and we haven't developed the argument yet, but the human is precisely the entity in the encounter that gives it its, what I call meat, that gives it it's not dead and it's not alive. It's this other thing. This is, in shamanistic practices, it's called becoming a corpse.
There
So,
was
becoming corpse.
I have always the quote, it's from the song where it said at the souli meat.
Yeah.
Like souli, there's a song and then there's a singer and she called I am the souli meat.
Yeah.
Which is something not really body only or soul only, but something like
Well,
mass of.
in shamanistic practice, or put it slightly differently, when an animal dies, and so this is not necessarily human, but when an animal dies, and before the body turns into a situation that is not edible, but it's no longer alive, that's when the body turns into flesh or meat.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So
meat is not that which is existing as meat when the animal is alive. it only exists in this odd, in this odd becoming process on its way to becoming a corpse, except it doesn't get to corpse because it is meat. And this is the human, this is what they're talking about here. This is the flesh part, this is the live part. But it's not really alive, it's both alive and dead. It's not really dead, it's not really alive, it's not alive and dead at the same time. It is this diffraction, this wave, this entity that sits in the not the intersection, because in the becoming. And so that's sort of what you were talking about, except for the fact that you were saying reverse. You were saying like a reverse moment. There is no meat here, because of the way in which the measurement happens. The meat is the flesh is taken away.
Yeah.
The measurement takes away the flesh.
No, yeah, definitely.
And so what she's saying here is Bohr is trying to get at how flesh is added, how it becomes added value. It's not dead, it's not yet measured, and at the same time it's in a position where it can almost be measured, but not yet. So in that not yet, that's the flesh moment.
But couldn't be, I mean, when you're saying that the object is devoided of meaning, I would see it exactly the other way around, that there is lots of noise happening just because the meaning is gone, in the way of adding this meaning of fake.
Yeah, I think so. I think the fake kind of removing the fake from it was just taking it as stuff that's kind of been denoted in this sort of database. I think through measuring it, it's not that it's devoid of meaning. I don't think anything is devoid of meaning, but I guess it's become. These are objects that had a lot of meaning in terms of and in an interpretive value. If you could return them to their context and that meaning, I think they're almost in a stasis. But they're in a stasis that kind of takes meaning making off in a different direction, and that becomes one of conservation and one of like that constant
writing,
condition reporting and noticing events. So it becomes almost like it's taking a cultural object and making it a science object, but by how you measure it.
I think it's just that you don't read the object, you write the object, like you write on and on and on and on. And I think this whole thing of, like this whole meaning that's actually there from all the objects get like added in the way of having this one object now that makes the whole collection in a way interact with another, because you can't quite know which one the fake one is, means that that's what I'm saying, it's not voiding meaning, it's actually like it's lots of noise happening right now in this cabinet or in this kind of like collection.
No, you were saying two different things there, or you're saying two. What are you saying?
I think because I think you're talking about the fake within it, whereas I just momentarily removed the issue of the fake from it.
Yeah.
I think the issue from the fake, I think in terms of changing meaning or changing the way these objects interact, is it adds doubt, and if you add doubt anywhere, it just it can go through the whole set, because I think people who work in museums are very aware of doubt, but I don't think everyone necessarily is, but who access museums thinks that most of it is definite and real and true, but there is a lot of doubt.
But doubt brings in a system that is, let's say, at best the Newtonian system. And so in that sense the example's not working for this. It's almost there, but it's not quite there yet, because you're referring to how the Newtonian system will work. The element of doubt, the element of erasure, trace, this kind of thing that gets into it. We're going to hold this for a second. Sophie, can you go into your chapter?
Okay.
Because I want to get everything on the table so that we at least, because I'm worried about time. And also, can you reopen the window again? And also, do you guys need a break? Are you okay? You need a break? No, good. The back row needs a break. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so
we're just getting air, so the back row can get air. No break. Go on.
So I was very interested in the question of biomimics, which she talks about.
Biomimics.
Yeah. And
I
if you
just misheard you, I thought you said biominutes. I was thinking,
if you go to 365, she quotes Bennius. Should I read that?
yes, please.
Biomimics develop a high degree of awe, bordering on reverence. Now that they see what nature is truly capable of, nature-inspired innovations seem like a hand up out of the abyss. As we reach up to them, however, I can't help but wonder how we will use these new designs and processes. What will make the biomimicry revolution any different from the Industrial Revolution? Who's to say we won't simply steal nature's thunder and use it in the ongoing campaign against life? This is not an idle worry. The last really famous biomimetic invention was the airplane. The Wright brothers watched vultures to learn the nuances of drag and lift. We flew like a bird for the first time in 1903, and by 1914 we were dropping bombs from the sky, which sort of takes us back to that whole question of war and whether he was sort of involved in the production
in
of
the war,
atomic bomb,
yeah.
whether his work contributed to that. But I think the whole chapter is really fascinating and is sort of relevant to my work as well, because if we lit up that finger, the neon that's used in that was discovered in really deep sea creatures that live in the bottom of the sea and give out that phosphorescence. Is it still working?
I think so.
We'll see in 1 second. Hold on. I think it's got a switch.
Yep. Is it on?
No.
Oh no. Okay, no.
Okay, never mind.
Okay.
It's in that picture actually. It's in the seated pictures of it. Yeah, because I made a chair out of this. So, well, the seat of the chair. You can just see it at the bottom there. So that neon was discovered in these deep sea creatures and made into a product which is used. So then I was very interested in the biosteel as well, which is again a very controversial biomimics, in which they have taken goats and mixed them with the DNA of a silk spider and mixed it with the goat's milk to produce biosteel. And I actually emailed them and asked them about their product and whether they'd send out samples, and this is what they replied. It was quite funny. It's all highly secretive, and they weren't at all happy about giving any information. So they emailed in a very German way as well. Dear Ms. Hedwick, thank you very much for your inquiry and interest in our products. We ask for your understanding that we are unable to answer inquiries from students regarding the provision of information or product samples. Best regards. So they wouldn't give any information on the biosteel, and they wouldn't give any samples at all. But it's been used by the military and in surgery at the moment. And Haraway says something very interesting on page 369. Where she says, what is at issue and at stake is what counts as nature for whom and at what costs. So she's sort of really questioning the use of biomimics. But I think one thing that really captured my imagination was the brittle star. And in fact, amazingly, on the weekend, like I said, I was in Scotland, and we took the ferry to this tiny island called the Isle of Cumbrae, and came across the smallest aquarium you've ever seen in your life, for which we paid £5, and they actually had a brittle star in it. So that's what it looks like. So I took a photo.
Oh wow, great.
Yeah.
Well, the star must be really annoyed.
But yeah, they
Very
have
large.
brittle stars up in Scotland, and these things, as you probably read, are just one giant eye. and that to me was really fascinating, the idea that something could become something else that hasn't got a brain. And I was reading about...
Pardon me, is that also true of octopus?
What, that they haven't got a brain?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because they're very intelligent, but they don't have a brain.
Yeah, and...
which is why I can't eat them.
Oh, right. Well, I don't eat
They do
them.
have like something like a brain in each tentacle.
Do they?
Yeah, they have like a kind of entanglement of neurons, which could, they don't call it because it's not a brain, but they have.
Well, that's the same with the brittle
Yeah.
star, really. It doesn't have
Yeah.
a brain, but it's all seeing, and its legs can drop off,
Yeah.
and they can still emit neon whilst they've dropped off, so that the predator goes for the leg instead of the brittle star, and it gets away. It's really clever. Yeah, it is very clever. But so
in
I
fact,
was.
that is actually the advanced human.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
no, that's what she's getting at. That's
Yeah.
human. Yeah.
So then I was looking at whispering window technology. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's amazing technology. And so if you go to Selfridges or Harrods for their Christmas decoration, they are all using whispering windows so that the whole surface becomes a speaker.
Huh.
And where I read about it actually was in Vogue, and they said it's done by magnets, but it's not. I got hold of them as well, and they sell it. They're not secretive at all. They're quite keen. I've asked him to sponsor me, but I don't know if they're going to.
See, that's why they're not answering you. They know that there's the next question is funding.
But they, it's basically an invisible speaker, and so it makes a surface like any surface. So you could use a floor, or just wood, glass, metal, anything that will conduct.
But wasn't there like there was a there was a like external speaker you could buy from MTV.
What? Say that?
There was external speaker you could buy that
Oh,
you
I see,
attach
right.
to the surfaces, and
Or
that
excited.
yeah, something like that, and that changes that surface into a speaker.
Right.
So there is a little speaker in it, but it never has that much
Oh,
power.
because the speaker uses a membrane that,
Yeah.
that which produces, that's the surface which actually that makes
Vibrates.
the sound.
Yeah, it makes the
There is the vibration element,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
exciter. But then you have the membrane, which is the material that kind of, if you have kind of attaches to the frame, and so that's what produces the sound, makes the sound become
Resonate.
yeah,
Real,
Yeah.
in a sense.
which gets back to your question of what is real. Yeah.
And those exciters just do not have the membrane, and then when you attach it to any surface, then that surface becomes the membrane that makes the sound. So then it picks up the character of that surface.
Yeah. Anyway, it's sort of.
So what is this that you just picked up? What is that group of papers?
Oh, this is. I'll pass them around. They're not very well printed, but this is the phonic technology, whereby you put these amplifiers on the surface you want to be. It's very clever. So it's like you're creating a speaker out of a surface, which to me is fascinating because I want to do it on copper or something like that, so that whole I want to project onto copper, and then that whole surface becomes a speaker as well.
Huh.
So anyway, if anyone wants to see
About 20 or 30 years ago, there was a craze in gallery shows where everyone wanted a wall that spoke, and you had to listen to the wall with stethoscopes. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And the thing is that it was very complicated because often this is just when the telecommunications were just sort of coming into the mobile side of it, so it was like
Yeah.
the 90s or the early noughts. Anyway, and so you'd be listening, but then you'd also hear the conversations of like somebody having a bath, or someone dealing with their kids, or it was completely bizarre. And then if you moved the stethoscope around, you would get different apartments and so on. And but what is being amplified there? What is the thing that you're hearing?
Whatever you want to.
So you can throw sound onto it.
Yeah, you can do anything. You can put, they say your iPhone, your iPod, anything. You can just run it off pre-recorded. Or you can, the whispering window technology is really advanced now spraying out perfumes, so you get, it's like all your senses are being bombarded at
Yeah.
once, but it's quite clever, really.
Yeah.
But one thing I was very interested in was where she talks about body memory as well,
Mhm.
on page 393.
Sophie, have you seen or heard the Laurie Anderson piece? Where it's a table with two sort of like indentations carved into it, and you put your elbows on it, and then you put your hands on your ears, and the sound projected underneath the table, and the sound goes up through your arms.
Oh, wow.
You can hear it through your fingers into your ears.
That sounds good.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Communication via bone conduction. Says here.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A typical application.
Yeah.
Advertising, obviously. Information points, ATM, outdoors, decking, community projects, communication via bone conduction. I mean, it's precisely that. That's,
Huh.
Yeah.
this is the vibration.
So I thought I'd sort of talk about this in terms of my work as well with body memory. I'll read this, what she says first.
What page? Sorry.
Page 393.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, she's talking about brittle stars again. But in the parenthesis, she says electrons, like brittle stars, are complex phenomena that are lively and enlivened. Memory and remembering are not mind-based capacities, but marked historialities ingrained in the body's becoming. And I think that's, to me, that's just really fascinating to do with my work and how I use time as well. And I've done this very small piece where I've used, these were analogue photos that I've taken a copy of and made them into digital. The first is a scan of my daughter, and this was done in Melbourne because she was born in Australia, and they had then the really cutting edge technology so that you could actually really see the baby. In fact, my son who was there, he must have been 7, he leapt out of his seat and said, "It's a girl, you can see it's a girl." And you could really see that he said she looks like Mary, and she did look exactly like her sister when she was born. They were like twins, they're amazingly alike. But you could just see very clearly from that image. And so an antique store that I buy a lot of stuff from gave me this, and it's absolutely brilliant because it's photos from, I think these are from like the 1918s, they're really old. So I've mixed up photos. I'll pass it round, you can have a look.
No, she's only going to show it to herself.
And it says on the back, Lucy's camera, I love that. And then I've mixed it with photos. It's a bit like Tracy Eamon's photo album of me when I was young, and my mum holding me because I was the youngest of 4. And then I'm always the one sucking my thumb, so I sucked my thumb for a long time. My mum was very horrible and put stuff on it that tasted revolting, so I would stop sucking it. But yeah, these are all photos of me and my sisters. So I was kind of mixing up just the idea of what is fiction and what isn't, and body memory and things. So yeah, that's just.
And
very
what is
small
body
piece.
memory then?
Well, that's the thing. I think it's an embodiment,
Mm-hmm.
and that it has history to it, attached to it.
Okay. Warm. Yeah. Yeah.
I regard it as muscle memory. Is that
Well, that's what you need to find out.
I mean, in terms when I used to dance, body memory to me was that you'd learn the movements, your body remembered them. You didn't actually have to have them in your brain, just the music, the right music would form the steps for you.
Mm-hmm. So how's that memory?
I regard that as muscle memory because that's key to playing a musical instrument. Is that, and that I guess it's something intellectual, but it's something that's held in the body.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I've used this example. I haven't used this example for a while. I have used this example in the past, which is that in the late 80s, the journal Nature, which you've seen around, published an article about cell memory, saying that cells that this I can't think of his name now, it's not on my head, this guy had discovered that cells had a memory, and he was following Derrida's argument about this kind of memory of the body and this notion of how memory gets imprinted on the body. And Benveniste, that was his name. And anyway, so they tried to redo the experiment because it was nature, it was science, and they couldn't. And they found out that he had lied, and he had actually faked the experiments. But they'd already published the article, so this was like, considered like heresy, because they couldn't redo the thing. And so he then, it erupted an entire discussion as to what was real, what was fake, what's allowable. If you can't reproduce the argument, the experiment, then it's no good, and so on and so forth. Years later, by which we mean something like 30 or 40 years later, it's now become clear that cells have a memory, which is not quite the same thing as body having a memory, but it's the fact that something is able to be repeated, and not just repeated, but there's an iteration that creates the next move. So that's why she's talking about it in terms of the star, chopping off its leg, and because it doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have an eye, it's all eye. It's the all-seeing eye, that kind of thing. So again, I ask you to think about this in terms of the superpositionality, questions of diffraction. I'm not convinced we're all 100% clear now on the difference or the similarities between difference, diffraction, entanglement, superpositionality.
I've got just one last thing, which is where I've written.
You tracked down the CIA.
We are on the university.
Okay.
And
what page?
It's sort of embodying the universe. She talks about right at the end, 396.
Okay,
it's kind of to do with what you were talking about.
But don't forget that she's also, just so we have, I just feel like I need to say it, in this example that you just gave before, in the notion of body, it's an anti-individual, anti-neoliberal position. It basically says that the body is embodied. It's part of the body, so that we might see ourselves as these individual entities. But in fact,
I think that this sentence that we read, Sophie read, about memory, is very deep in the choice of terms.
Which
read the parentheses on page 393.
Oh yeah.
Electronic liability of stars of complex phenomena that are lively and enlivened. Memory and remembering are not mind-based capacities, but marked historialities ingrained in the body's becoming. And what caught my attention is historialities, because the very notion of generally one should be very aware of using etymologies, but in this case it resonates. History begins with the idea of engraving around a cylinder, generally a color, visually, the sequence of events chronologically of a general or something that is in Rome, the Antonin column with all the history of the conquest going on in the spiral like that. So, but this is ingrained in the body's, not in the body, but in the body's becoming. So there is a shaping of the evolution of the body, which is what becomes repeated. And I believe this is very important to emphasize. So it's not, and what Barad is writing, a mind-based awareness, the storage of information that is sits more on the side of the practice. So in this sense, yes, one can speak of muscle memory, but it is something that is a mode and a behavior, or I would say a pattern that has become installed and therefore repeats.
And just keep thinking of it as becoming corpse, and not, that the body is the meat, is the enlivened scenario. If you just read the next sentences down to sort of the middle of the next paragraph, could you just do that, Sophie? Just read from just as a human subject, because I think it's really critical here.
Just as the human subject is not the locus of knowing, neither is it the locus of the ethicality. We, but not only we humans, are always already responsible to the others with whom or which we are entangled, not through conscious intent, but through the various ontological entanglements that materiality entails. What is on the other side of the agential cut is not separate from us. Agential separability is not individuation. Ethics is therefore not about right response to a radically exteriorised other, but about responsibility and accountability for the lively relationalities of becoming of which we are a part.
Just a little bit further down there.
Rejecting the metaphysics of individualism that serves as a foundation for traditional approaches to ethics, a genteel realism proposes an alternative metaphysics that entails a reworking of the notions of causality and agency. Traditional conceptions of causation are concerned with the causal relationship between distinct sequential events. In my A Genteel Realist account, causality is rethought in terms of intra-activity. Intra-actions do not simply transmit a vector of influence among separate events.
Just that last sentence now. Yeah.
It is through specific intra-actions that a causal structure is enacted.
So just to get back to Coral's comment, so what you were talking about is precisely opposite of what's being said here, right?
The mathematics.
No. The thing about the condition report kind of thing, and how the measuring removes it brings it into a corpse state, and once it's into the corpse state, as it were, once it's a completely dead object, it can be an atom. It doesn't really matter what it is, right? That's the okay. Now let's go to 396.
Can
Oh,
I
yeah,
give an
sorry.
example?
Yes.
Which,
Can you say? Can you give an example or ask for one?
no, offer one.
Oh yeah.
Which sort of moves beyond the human part, but actually speaks of body as an intra-action. Years ago, I had pet rats. And
What color?
One was an albino,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one was, I'm sure, a rat that they just picked up off the street corner, because he was not your pet rat material. The other one thought he was a dog, who used to follow me around the house and sit on my foot and scratch my head. And it was lovely.